Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to Happy Strong Family. Today, we are going to be discussing the relationship crisis with Dr. Rashid. Dr. Rashid?
Jazakallah khair, Sister Muntaha. It's always a pleasure to be here. So, my name is Zaihan Rashid. I am a semi-retired physician, surgeon. I have found, as I've found more about the community that we represent, live in, that our biggest problems are not coming from outside the house.
Mhm.
Our huge, massive challenges are coming from inside the house. What do I mean? When COVID broke, when COVID became apparent, when the world started to find that they are suddenly a very different place to live, many people thought this must be the biggest crisis people have ever faced. But I'm here to remind myself and my audience today that our biggest challenges, our biggest, if you like, threats are coming from things that are called relationships. Obviously, relationship is a big word. It could be relationship between husband and wife. It could be relationship between parents and children. It could be relationship between employer and employee, student, teacher, etc. But what I really want to emphasize today on is really say what in fact is the biggest challenge that I may face ever in my life. That's not going to be COVID. That's not going to be employment. That's not going to be even things like health, although, of course, relationship crisis will affect the health also. So I want to just emphasize and talk about these three things. Why should relationships be important, in particularly a wife and a husband relationship? Remembering that this is the first relationship that Allah originated human beings from. The first relationship in this world was not a father and a mother, was not a son and a daughter. It was a husband and a wife. So inevitably that would imply that there is an importance to it. And it probably is the reason why many of us, sadly, without recognizing the importance of it, ignore it. So to me, there are three big things that we are facing. One is I believe a lot of us young men and women do not want to have a relationship as a husband and wife. They don't consider this as a priority. Second group of people I find are people that are married but are very unhappy. And a third group of people were married once and never ever want to be again. So to me, these are three big challenges that we have to offer some solutions for our youngsters.
Yeah.
That I hope is something we can emphasize on today.
Yeah, especially the concept of like someone who's in a marriage and they're unhappy, or people who are just not interested in getting married anymore. I feel like that's a huge, especially with the kind of culture that we're in, the concept of just being okay with moving from one person to another. You're not even thinking about, well, what's commitment? What is
Yeah.
actually being married? So I guess the question is like, why do we even get married? And I saw your book here and I was really excited. I was like, oh, before you type it out, what's that about? So maybe you can tell us a bit more about the book and why marriages are
For
important.
sure, for sure. So I'd like to think about anything that's not going well to go back to the basics. Anything that's not going well. So if I asked if somebody's health is not good, I, as a doctor, would always look at and say, why did their health become bad?
Yeah.
Were they following the principles of good health? Were they eating healthy? Were they moving healthy? Were they sleeping well? Did they manage stress? Did they have an idea health is important? If all of those things are not important and I handed somebody a bunch of pills, that literally just ignores the entire concept of how and what actually happened.
Yeah.
So I might be able to fix things on the surface, but I would not be addressing the cause. And I see this as a huge issue in the world that we live in, that we are addressing superficialities. We're addressing what I would consider the top of them. It's like the common notion, the fact that icebergs are only showing the tip on the surface.
Yeah.
What we see, the mountain on the surface of the earth, is actually 1/10 of what it actually is. So imagine Mount Everest is 9 miles above, but 125 miles below the surface of the earth. I mean, that's not a small concept. When I first heard this concept, it took me some time to say, oh, so now look at relationships in the same context. If the superficiality of things is, well, it's just a matter of getting on with somebody, isn't it? To have a relationship, we could do this without getting married. And Mr. Muntaha, one of the things I find has become very challenging is that the world that does not believe in God can very easily produce solutions
Yeah.
for us and suggest that they are okay and they are fine. Meaning, why be married at all? You want to have a person of the opposite gender as your partner, you could do that without getting married.
Hmm.
You want to have children, you don't need to be married for that,
Yeah.
etc. So, the first thing I want to emphasize is the why part will not be understood if a person doesn't first understand how and why am I getting married as a religious person. So, to
Mm.
me, religiosity is a big part of emphasizing and understanding the why part. Because without this understanding, it becomes a very big source of confusion because now it's logic.
Yeah.
And logic, sadly, will take us into very deep holes from which it would be difficult to come out. So, I look at relationships, particularly with the husband and wife, as a part of a triangle. So, on the
Yes.
top to me is his creator and her creator, Allah. On the two sides are the man and the woman. And so the way I look at it is fix that vertical relationship if you're going to have anything to do with the goodness of this horizontal relationship.
Yeah, I've seen that diagram and it's so beautiful because I think it gives the concept of, and I see it there as well, loving for the sake of Allah as well. Because when you love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's out of worldly gain, it's just for His sake and it increases over time. It's just something that will continue increasing, whether there's more space, whether there's more closeness.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is a really important concept because when you have a particular goal, I think that's what they say, like in general, is for the husband and wife to have one goal that they're working towards. So if the greater goal is Jannah and if the greater goal is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're able to work towards that together. So I
Inshallah.
see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see
And
that.
this is a very,
Yeah.
I think, because when this concept comes up, and I'm sure you have seen, I definitely have seen people that were married for the sake of it. It's very common. So you ask an average person, why are you getting married?
Hmm.
Most people would say, well, what do you mean, why am I getting married? Everybody does.
You have to,
You,
or it's just something
it's
to do.
just something we
It's
do.
like going to school. It's like, yeah,
Yeah. Or like
yeah,
having breakfast or
exactly.
like going out for a dinner. I mean, why would you even ask the question? But
Mm,
here, the why part, I believe, is an extremely important part of the
yeah,
whole thing because imagine doing something without a reason. Well, you wouldn't have much of a reason to finish it.
exactly.
You wouldn't be committed to it. You
Yeah,
wouldn't want to sacrifice. You wouldn't want to give up. You wouldn't want to invest. There's nothing of that nature that you will do.
yeah,
And yet, I'm constantly amazed at how much people invest in their career,
yeah,
how much people invest in a home that they want to build, how much they invest in a business venture, etc. And then when you say to yourself, so, but what was that contract you made when you got married? You all, I mean, I'm sure you've heard, all of us are aware that there is what's called the khutbah of nikah, the statement that is read at the time of a man and a woman becoming
yeah.
engaged in a relationship, a man and wife, husband and wife, as a Muslim. So there are three ayahs that are at that time all the time. And the khutbah is also very common because we hear it in the Jummah Salah, and those of us who, the men particularly. So Allah Ta'ala says, Inna alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu, wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina, man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu, wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu, wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. This is the beginning of the khutbah.
Mhm.
Then Allah Ta'ala's ayah says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatihi wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. O you who believe, maintain the God consciousness of yourself and do not die except as Muslims. Then the
Mm,
second ayah of that same khutbah is Ya ayyuhan nasu taqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida. O you who believe, maintain God fearness
mm,
in your relationship. And the third ayah, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida. Do not say anything except the truth. Now, Sister Muntaha, I remind the couple who's getting married to say, think about this word taqwa, God consciousness. How important a concept that is when you become this relationship, husband and wife. Think about it. Nobody can see you as a husband and a wife except you two and Allah. Nobody knows really what goes on in the bedroom or in the house. But there is nobody else. Outside, somebody could say, "Hey, you did this business deal not good. Hey, you stole. Hey, you didn't give him his that the other." But who can say anything like this
yeah.
about a husband and wife? So if that taqwa, God consciousness part is not there, I remember in the beginning when I used to see this, I thought, what has this got to do with marriage?
Yeah.
But really, when you think of marriage as something that the Prophet ﷺ said, this relationship is half your deen. It literally describes half of your relationship with God.
Yeah.
How important that suddenly becomes. What would that mean? It would mean that you will not excel unless you have recognition that Allah is watching you, and you will have to explain the way you lived your life. You will
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
to give her rights, and you will have to accept the responsibility, and she will have to do the same. If that relationship, and as like I said earlier, there is now this non-godly version of life which says you can do everything as per somebody who claims to be Muslim.
Yeah.
Hey, we don't have to be married. But I define this God consciousness as something that helps you understand a your private domain on your public domain. You are now clear. I have to explain why I did not do what I promised that day to do. See, there
Exactly.
is one thing called alan in nikah, in the Muslim marriage. You have to declare openly
Hmm.
that you have now accepted this sister, this woman as your wife, and she has to accept that also. But the relation and relationship are two very different things. You can be related to somebody and yet not care about them.
Mm.
And sadly, we see that so much.
Yeah.
We see people that are married, and if you looked at how they live their life, it's almost like they are living as two parallel lives. They both have their lives, but I call them roommates, not life partners.
Hmm.
I don't see them thinking with one mind.
Yeah.
I don't mean by that in any way demeaning somebody to say we don't think individually. We do, but we have a common goal. We're
Exactly.
trying to get to Jannah.
Yeah.
And think of what will happen from a relationship that starts like this. What kind of example would that set for the people who don't even believe in God? If somebody saw me as a married man denying the responsibilities to my wife, acting like a horrible husband, bad father, what exact example would that give to people who are not married? Think about
Mm.
how they would look to say, wow, this guy is a Muslim, and look at the way he behaves with his wife, the way he
Yeah.
behaves with his children. I'm not talking about myself, I'm just
Yeah.
talking about an experience, an example. And so, what I'm saying is, God consciousness is an essential component of marriage. One must recognize this before one even plans something. You can plan it, but what happens when most of the time, if you hear from somebody, they're planning their marriage, what does that really mean for most of us?
Yeah.
It's not meaning that they're reading Surah Nur.
Yeah.
It's not usually meaning they're reading the first 5 ayahs of Baqarah and the last ruku of Baqarah. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that they are going over Surah Hujarat. It doesn't usually. It usually means they want to figure out how many guests, what to serve, which hall to book, what dress to wear,
Yeah.
who will enter with whom, when, what to play. If this has become the planning of marriage, it's not really the planning of marriage. It's the planning of that single day called wedding day.
Hmm. Yeah. Why do you think their focus, especially I would say in like our cultures, is on more of the day rather than the long term marriage? Like, where does that come from? I'm so curious about that because I'm experiencing that too. I'm not gonna lie, and I feel like it's it's a shift in focus. You know, like
Yeah.
your focus is, well, I actually want to get married because I want to like build with my spouse and I want to grow, but I feel like it's almost like distraction. I think because there's a lot of lavishness, there's a lot of investment into other people
Yeah.
instead of ourselves during
Yeah.
that period, and
Yeah.
especially dreams of other people. Like a lot of people, they're ending up doing these certain like culture traditions, not for themselves but for their parents. And I would say the same, that I would of course respect my family and continue to do these things for them, but where does that culture come from? Like, why is it like that?
I think without question, Sister Muntaha, we have to recognize that the air we are breathing has been pumped by the West. We are, as Muslims, believing a lot of things because we see them being done. We see them being adopted. We see them being accepted without being questioned. In other words, we become trendy people.
Mm.
We like to do the in thing, we like to go
Yeah.
with the flow.
Yeah.
We do not have the ability to question, to say, but why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of spending one day and $50,000 upon something that nobody will remember after 6 months? Most likely, the husband and the wife getting married probably wouldn't remember it all that much because we caught up with so many other
Yeah.
things. So, this is something I think I would say in one word: question things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ask around this matter to say, What are we doing to invest in these 30 years I propose to live as a
Yeah.
wife and as a mother and as a daughter and as all those relationships that excel me? I forgot to say in the beginning, the personal component, a person excelling in their personal ability to do what they need to do, and then their public ability to be
Hmm.
socially excellent. What
Yeah.
do I mean? An excellent husband will be able to function in a home where a confident child will come into the place. Remembering that nowadays, when people do get married, the issue also is I don't want children.
Hmm.
And if I
Yeah.
have children, after one child, I'm reluctant to have a second one. So there's a whole series of things that have come from really breathing too much of what I call the secular air, questioning things to say, is this the purpose of marriage?
Yeah.
Is the purpose of marriage clear in my mind? Am I willing to spend some time, for example, reading a book, for example, going to a marriage workshop, for example, sitting in a halakha, for example, saying, what are the roadblocks in this huge venture that I've got to undertake? I
Yeah.
mean, how many careers can you think of where people jump into this thing headlong without a day's preparation?
Yeah.
I mean, would you imagine going on the road without ever having driven with somebody who can tell you how to avoid problems?
Hmm.
Would you ever imagine taking on a career? I often take the example of being a surgeon to say, can you imagine somebody who learned surgery on YouTube? How would you feel?
Yeah.
I see now so many people that are confident with little reason for that confidence. So our issue isn't just the superficiality. Our issue also, I think, is the lack of insight. I
Yeah.
just don't think we realize, not pointing at anybody, but in general, I think the realization that a man and a woman that are married according to proper, not according to, but with the proper understanding, they are the foundation of this society. Look at where shaitan hits. For those of us who believe in God and all that God has proposed, shaitan, the devil, is happiest when? The hadith says that shaitan hears the performance of his minions at the end of the day every night. And one after the other of his deputies returned with all kinds of news. I made this one lie. I made this one take a bribe. I made this one do this, that, and the other. And Shaitan doesn't acknowledge this too much until one of his minions shows up and says, I made them argue till they said the word that separated them. And you know what, Sister Muntaha? This is something to reflect upon. That Shaitan actually gets up and hugs this minion, this deputy, to say, you are my best
Yeah.
deputy, you are my best assistant. Why is shaitan so much after the relationship of man and woman? Because once this relationship is disturbed, what results from this? We all know what happens in broken homes, in single parent families, in children that have grown up without a father or without a mother, with children that do not have the confidence, even if they have both parents but to different occasions. Imagine the kind of life that results from this in the long term. What
Exactly.
kind of
Yeah.
unhappiness will it result? And it doesn't even stop there, does it? Now we are literally allowing this little person to have seen unhappiness in the home for years.
Yeah.
What confidence will that person have in adopting a relationship in the future? They might say, you know what? I've seen a very unhappy sister. I've seen a father and a mother that were at each other's throats. I saw my brothers that have not been able to stabilize anything because of the unhappiness in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, I see this sometimes as it's almost like people not appreciating. Do you realize how much this will affect your whole life?
Yeah.
No other relationship will affect you like the relationship that this are about to establish without thinking. You're spending so much time and money on that one day. And what is that day for? In all honesty, that's not to please Allah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in my experience, it's usually to please people.
And I think even from like a Western point of view, there's a lot more resources. I feel like they have a lot more on the actual marriage and focusing on that. I've noticed that because if we think about it, it's not just the Western culture. I feel like they actually have something going for them. They know that, okay, this is like a smaller day, it's just marriage. But I feel like a lot of times it's the focus that like the marriage as a relationship, that's not what it's looked at. It's
Hmm.
not the two people together. It's, well, if we think about it, it's having more of a focus on a broader image of like family. You got to put, you have to put the relationship first. And I think that's something that's hard for people to understand. And I feel like even with the concept of taqwa, I remember before when I used to learn about the word, we used to use like God fearing. And then it changed God consciousness, God mindfulness. And I know Dr. Mustafa Khatab, he actually uses mindfulness, God mindfulness. And I love that concept because if you think about mindfulness practices, it's bringing yourself into the present moment and
Yeah.
thinking what's most important is being able to focus. So I think if we're bringing
Absolutely.
that focus into our relationships, then it's really, well, both of us are trying to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
And so then I think that shifts everything. You're able to really focus on the marriage itself and not anything else because you have a way of adding on, to that
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think on the same lines that the purpose of family also has not been defined for a lot of people.
That's so
A
true. Yeah.
family is not just a group of people living together under one roof.
Yeah.
A family that lives as what I call it's almost like a market where I have seen people that have come from at different times of the day and gone to their own rooms
Yeah.
with little interaction between the family members. They're people that come, heat their food, and take that food to their room along with their digital device. Some have fridges in their own rooms, and it just becomes like a market where
Yeah.
people have somewhere to rest at night so that they can return back the next day to reinvest into the market economy that we are all become a part of. I think the husband and wife have got to think very carefully, and I don't myself think there's anything wrong with spending time. Look, you know what? We used to, I've heard several life coach gurus to say, how long do you think we should plan? For example, if I wanted to plan for 1 year, just whatever I'm going to do, what's a reasonable time frame to say, I'm going to plan the next 1 year? How much time should I spend doing that? Most times people have done next to no planning at all.
Yeah.
So that means that an unplanned life will come as what? And it's a very old notion saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think this is something that requires too much intellectual capacity to say, but it must be obvious that if a married life is not planned, so which means what does marriage plan mean? Well, what is it that we want to achieve from this marriage? Aside from the fulfillment of the desire, which of course is a part of the whole thing, but really, what other things do we expect to achieve? Meaning, this word taqwa, God consciousness, mindfulness, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Are we going to do prayers together? Are we going to make sure we know each other's responsibilities? Are we going to fulfill others' rights before we look for our own? Am I actually looking to see that this marriage leads me to Jannah, to Allah's
Yeah.
pleasure? Am I?
Exactly.
Because that changes the whole mindset.
Yeah.
Then I'd be willing to forgive more. Then I'd be willing to be less angry. Then I'd be willing to not bring back old mistakes. Then I'd be willing to say, you know what? I won't have to answer for her. I have to answer for myself.
Yeah.
I better make sure that I'm not giving away my good deeds to her by being a zalim, by being an oppressor to her. I mean, this is obviously in one podcast. There's no way we can cover all of this. But I would say if people could just work on those two things, their relationship with Allah and a careful assessment of the relationship with human beings,
Yeah.
starting with those that are closest to you. So if my parents, so for example, one of the things that becomes a big challenge for a lot of people is balancing between relationships, particularly for a husband to balance between the wife and the mother. Then there are other challenges like balancing between inside the house type life to outside the home life. Then there are other challenges like finances, for example, or things like my personal habits that have become one of the big reasons I hear from young people very regularly is I don't want to get married because I'm scared that my independence will no longer be there. I'll have to give up for the sake of this individual. And the sister is thinking sometimes, will I be able to do all that I was going to be doing?
Yeah.
Like, I want to, for example, establish a hospital in the third world. I have to take care of sick people. Might become very sick in that process. But hey, taking care of the world is more important than taking care of my husband. And the same thing for the husband also, who has got all these plans without thinking, how about including your wife? How about making this a we thing instead of a me thing? Really, if that narrative doesn't change, the me thing continues, the me, myself, and I, the new Trinity, as I call it.
Yeah.
If this narrative does not change to the we narrative, if it does not become a plan that involves my wife, I want to change my place of work, I cannot do that without her being involved. I hear, unfortunately, so many times, men and sometimes sisters, that men somehow seem to think that they are now running the show. They are basically in charge, and she is a quiet follower, a passive, if you like, being. And this is anything but Islamic.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ in his marriages is seen to have actively consulted his wives. Sometimes at the time of war, active hostilities have broken out. There is a real danger that something will happen, and the Prophet ﷺ is consulting his wife. He comes back from the cave having just revealed the revelation, and he doesn't run to his best friend, Abu Bakr. He runs to his wife, Khadija. Like, what is that saying? For our brothers who are listening to this podcast, please consider those as the examples of the best human being in the world, that he's consulting his wife. He is willing to ask his wife, Salama radiallahu anha, at the time of Sulh Hudaybiyah, again going to history a little bit, that after this major treaty between the non-Muslims and the Muslims, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad are upset, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they see this as defeat.
Yeah.
And they say, but why are we returning without the intention of Umrah? That's what we came to do. And so they are not willing to shave their hair, and they're not willing to do the sacrifice of the animals. So the Prophet ﷺ has never had this kind of, I wouldn't say challenge, but this denial of his leadership. So he comes back to whom? His wife. And his wife says, what? Ya Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do what you want them to do without having any further conversation. And they are your followers. Their hearts will soften. That's exactly what happened. Advice of a woman. And you can see this. There's so many things that wives also were very actively consulting husbands. So it became a team work. And I think if we can adapt that as the beginning of any conversation to say, look, before anything fails, remember, you failed between each other. You would have not fulfilled the basic rights of each other, responsibilities. Exactly. I'm sorry, it is a big topic. I'd love to have more of these conversations, which I really think are something that I personally feel sometimes, as I always say, treating cancer 4 is going to be more difficult than cancer that never even developed.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the concept of just when it comes to the husband-wife planning together. Like, it doesn't even have to be that I don't even think the initial process has to be them planning. It's just knowing each other's plans. I think once you discuss it, like, oh, this is what my spouse wants. They actually, in 1 year, this is where they see themselves. Interesting. And you kind of start to open up the conversation, open up thoughts that, okay, well, how is it we can make this more of us, instead of two different concepts.
Oh, absolutely.
That being said, I think we're going to take a few questions, inshallah, from the audience.
Yes, Jazakallah khair. We actually have a lot of questions for Dr. Rashid that came in over Instagram. Now, I do need to caution a few things here. That one, the questions are about it, because we titled this sort of the relationship crisis.
Sure.
So a lot of questions are based around that. And then the other thing is also there, like you said, we can't solve these matters on a podcast, right? So we can give some general advice, but without specific details, without specific backgrounds, without more information, some of these might be very hard to answer. But we encourage everyone to seek help. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of professionals in your area. Contact them. So inshallah, we'll try our best here. But by no means, though, is these answers are substituting for professional counselors and therapy and stuff like that. So sort of the first question we have here is, I'm getting divorced, but my family thinks I am wrong and hates me. They don't believe me. They would rather have me live in a failed marriage. So this question sort of comes back to the stigma around divorces in our culture, right? So now, assuming that this person has exhausted all means to work on their relationship and this was the final decision, what advice do you have for this sort of cultural stigma we have around divorce?
So, like anything else, an illness's treatment is never pleasant. Something that a surgeon removes is not because he loves removing that part, but he sees this as the solution to a better world, to a better, if you like, it's the best evil that he can think of. I should rephrase my word. It's the least of the devils.
Yeah.
It's basically something that would, without it, more harm would come. So I think the first concept with any thought of divorce is that one has to recognize that this is a complex issue. Never would you be able to resolve it in 1 or 2 sentences. But I would manage some principles. First of all, if marriage didn't start as an understanding that it is a contract that has to be fulfilled with 2 sides, if there was no ability in the beginning to understand why were you getting married to begin with, and also if the families sadly have not also had a chance to understand that no 2 people can succeed on their own without this massive cushion of humanity that's called a family. And unfortunately, because families have become disentangled, then inevitably those effects have come on families also, uh, on individuals also. So divorce, not pleasant. But I would say before a divorce, please consider carefully the three things that all of us can do. One is make serious consultations with Allah. Put your case in front of Allah. Ya Allah, I'm going through this. Ya Allah, help me. Secondly, involve those that you know can offer help. This will include therapists, but they should not be the first people to be involved. I hope you have friends. I hope you have family members that are older and experienced. I hope also that you have people that you can, if you like, ask for, like class friends, for example, people that are colleagues that you know are really good. We're looking at holistic human beings. We're not looking at people who are business partners, people who just share employer employees. We're looking at people who go beyond that superficiality. And I realize this is probably asking too much, but I still think we somehow underestimate the importance of good friends. Third thing, definitely, the third layer is people, professional people, imams, people who are trained at doing what is, I would call counseling. The reason I'm saying this is divorce has almost become like a delete button for a lot of us. It's just a one-stop shop type thing. And I believe that serious consultation ought to be, because one of the reasons why I'm saying this is it looks like divorce is an answer. And it may well be. I'm not here to judge the person's situation. They may well be in a marriage that they've had a lot of grief from. So I'm not by any means saying that they are wrong. I'm talking a very general concept that we have to take relationships more seriously. We have to invest in them a little bit more. We have to realize that it affects children. I don't see from this particular question whether any children are involved. Children go through major trauma when parents separate. Children usually have a very deep effect on their personality left from it. Children usually will be divided between two parents. I've seen it, week and weekends. It's not pleasant. None of it is pleasant. So I am sorry that the family is challenging this. I can't, of course, go through all of these details, but I would say, again, I don't know if this individual is a Muslim tradition person or not, recognize that Islam does put you into a very responsible position when you get married. So please do everything you can. And if it has not worked, then of course, between you and your family will be this big challenge, how to handle. And I would again put those three things on the top. Just like your relationship will be helped by good friends, family situation will also be helped by good friends. Just like me and you are challenged by things that are happening outside, we put our case in front of Allah. As a family, we should place the whole case in front of Allah also. And yes, sometimes family therapy is necessary. You have to sometimes involve a therapist that will talk to close family members and you.
Yeah.
So I hope, inshallah, that answers the question.
There's also one of the podcasts we had done with Sister Amila, Finding Marriage and Finding Yourself,
Yes.
where she spoke on this and how she dealt with, like family or anyone else who was questioning her decision. So that's something, if you're interested, you can look into as well.
Yeah. Sure.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question we had here was, so how do you know, like, how much is too much tolerance and sabr in an emotionally, physically abusive relationship, marriage? So what's that balance between sort of having sabr versus taking action and doing something? So
Jazakallah khair. Also a very good question.
Yeah.
I would say one thing that we have to remember, something called sabr and something called tahammul. These are two different words. They're Arabic words, but let's just dissect it a little bit in English. So, excuse me, something is ignored and something you are patient about. These are two different things. Ignored. What are ignored? You will find that if you pick up fights or if you find things that you disagree with, there's so many of them. You could literally, I have seen situations where somebody didn't flush the toilet and it becomes a source for aggravation. Somebody just dropped their dirty clothes everywhere. Somebody dumped their half-eaten food in the. So what I'm saying is sensitivity seems to have increased around some of these personal spaces to say, why can't we keep the space clean? Or why can't we get ready in time? Or why are you always, you can add the word there, but these conversations start to indicate that we are low on tolerance to begin with. And we are piling up a lot of what I call inbuilt pent-up emotion. So if communication has not developed, then these two things that are physically and emotionally abusive are very quickly going to manifest itself. So emotional abusing, never acceptable. Emotional abusing would be things like, I don't love you anymore, I hate you, or you are horrible, or things that comment on somebody's integrity. Dr. Gottman, who's very famous for writing on marriages, he's probably the most biggest guru in marriage, relationship, etc. He writes that once criticism becomes a part of relationship, resentment becomes a part of relationship. A person starts to find faults in a person, and it's willy-nilly. There's really, it's almost like a person is just constantly on this barrage of criticism of a person. It becomes very difficult for that relationship to continue. So
Yes. Yeah.
I would say if you are facing that kind of emotional abuse, then it's very difficult to continue. Physical abuse, of course, needless to say, once a physical abuse starts, unfortunately there is usually the beginning of a long series of, the more you deal with people who have had bad marriages, poor relationships, the more it becomes obvious that physical abuse seems to have been tolerated for too long. So there's a balance between the two. There is no hard and fast. I would say for this individual, a lady or man, please don't be shy of asking for help. Often these things become a big challenge because we have nobody to turn to. We feel that we are isolated. We start to be self critical. We start to say, there's nothing good about me. My husband or my wife is right. I must be a useless so and so. This is a very, very unfortunate way of thinking. I also question whether our relationship with God has been allowed to be uh, protective of some of these things that can happen. I'm not saying that somebody will stop physically abusing, but emotional abuse has a lot to do with what self image we have to begin with. How do we see ourselves in the light of the world? What are our pastimes? How are our friends? Who are the people that we take advice from? If you are indeed isolated and you are living, so for example, I'll give you an example which I saw of an immigrant sister whose passport had been taken away by her husband,
Mm.
who had been deprived of any economic, she was not given any support. She was just given food to eat. That's it. She was not allowed to leave. She had language skill issues, etc., etc. Clearly, that kind of thing cannot be
Yeah.
tolerated. And sometimes it's not being aware of your rights that makes it worse. When people don't realize you don't have to put up with this. You do
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
have to go through all of this. Neither Allah nor His Messenger, neither society really will accept or tolerate this. So I would say to that individual, really nothing physically abusive should be tolerated.
Yeah.
How you deal with this, again, I would go with those three things again. Go, first of all, make sure that you have asked those that are close to you, people that, now please don't think that I'm advising every disagreement to be dealt with by the family. I would say a minimum of 3 nights have to be allowed to see if the situation, for example, if it's emotional abuse, please allow it time. Because remember, sometimes the opposite partner is under a lot of stress themselves. Maybe it's financial issues that are causing problems. Maybe it's the in laws that have an issue. Maybe it's their personal health that has become a challenge for them. Maybe it's all three. So it's really such a huge minefield that it's very difficult to say a general advice. But I would say, if I would say going to say nothing else, I would say first, physical abuse is completely intolerable. We should have zero tolerance of physical abuse. Emotional abuse is a very subjective kind of thing. So involve friends, involve an imam or a good friend, and definitely don't be shy in this day and age, because most of us, I don't know if the questionnaire is living in this country or another, but when we are deprived of this family cushion that we used to have when we came from wherever we came from, we had aunts and khalas and popos and chachis and grandparents and neighbors and teachers and all those good things were there. Now, when we've come and lived in a isolated society, we've become a part of society where the family unit is often just that nuclear family. So definitely there, it's a bigger challenge for these things to happen. I'm sorry, it's a very general answer, but that's what I would go for. No physical abuse, emotional abuse ought to be assessed with friends involved, family involved, imams involved, and if necessary, yes, therapists involved.
Yeah, and I think the concept of sabr as well, they're saying like they're having sabr. Sabr includes taking action as well. It
Absolutely.
includes that,
Absolutely.
you know
Thank you for
what,
reminding.
if
Yeah.
I need to take myself out of a situation, if I need
Yes.
to change something, that's actually part of sabr. Sabr, it's part of being patient. It's part of dealing with the hardship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you in a way to get through it. Because we
Yes.
haven't been told that we have to be stuck in our life and we have to be stagnant. We can't change. And we have that free will that, you know what, I'm in a situation that I don't feel comfortable in, I'm going to take space. I'm going
Yeah.
to do XYZ. And that action itself is sabr itself, you know? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you for reminding.
Yeah.
Sabr is not a blank check. Sabr
Exactly.
should never be taken as something that our deen has involved without taking action, like you said.
Exactly.
Sabr is acting according to the rules,
Yeah.
recognizing that Allah is the one that's putting me through the test.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. MashaAllah. Thank you for pointing
Yeah.
that out.
Good, Jazakallah khair. So the next questions, we've sort of talked about them, and we had a lot of questions come in about this. I'll read the next two together because they're sort of related. I tried to group them related, but we had about 6, 7 questions that were all related to the same theme of in-laws.
Sure.
And it was, how much should one tolerate in-laws involvement in marriages? How should couples deal with this and set boundaries? And then the second one I sort of also grouped in was, a lot of guys were asking about the balance you were talking about earlier, right? So this question was like, my husband's family is not kind to me and regularly insults me. I feel he does nothing. How should he respond to them? So
Jazakallah
there's
khair. Again, these are very, very common themes. And
Yeah.
if you look through the marriage woes, the things that cause people to go through the difficulties to go through, one of them is the family of the opposite partner. And I would say, again, some general principles apply. First, I personally am a big believer in a marriage workshop before marriage even takes place. And marriage workshop by no means involves only the parties getting married. I think we should not be shy in involving our family with it. One of the things I would say with families who are engaging or about to engage in marriage, please take this as the most serious investment you will have in your life. Please do not, and that's why I'm not pointing this to anybody in particular, please do not take that wedding day as the most serious event that will occur in your
Yeah.
marriage. Please take that as the beginning or the ancillary to a happy life, but be prepared for it. Understand the responsibilities, husbands and wife. A husband has a very, very, how can I put it? He has a balancing role to play. When Allah Ta'ala says, I have placed men, ar-rijalu qawwamun ala nisa. Allah has placed men as qawwam, as administrative heads, responsibles over women. This does not mean to say that they boss women around. This means they are responsible for the woman's well being, her physical well being, her emotional well being, her intellectual well being, her spiritual well being. I remember our Imam one time asking, he said, if your wife is not reciting Fatiha properly, you will be held responsible. I had never ever thought of that as something I should do. He said, because a woman is not expected to travel outside the house to look for these things. Her husband is supposed to be in charge. So imagine if this husband becomes involved in the pain that his wife is feeling, that she feels that herself is not being given a reasonable chance to survive in a new environment. If she feels that there is a group of people that are opposed to her, that are challenging her decisions, that are telling her, for example, what is right and wrong. I would say there is a very serious case of reorienting the self to say, what was the purpose of this marriage? Was it to bring my wife into this miserable situation that she now faces? This is zulm. If she is right in what she's saying, and I'm not doubting her, but I'm saying I have to obviously give the benefit of the doubt to say I haven't heard the other side story. But if this sister is correct in what she's saying, this is zulm. This is tyranny. This is oppression. And oppression is a very serious crime in front of Allah.
Yeah.
Oppression is something that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, it will be in the forms of darknesses on the day of judgment. Imagine being in the darkness because of how you treated your wife, because of how you allowed her responsibilities and rights to be all messed up, and she felt up asking to say, I'm insulted. The Prophet ﷺ has told us we have no right to hurt another human being with our tongue or our hands. The
Yeah,
Prophet ﷺ even questioned the iman of a person who is unwilling to give the rights in the form of safety. Right? Assalamu alaikum. What does assalamu alaikum mean? When we make this greeting, we're saying, may you be safe from anything that could happen from me. So doesn't that include your wife? Doesn't that include, I mean, again, the same thing. The mother-in-law and the father-in-law. I mean, some people used to call them outlaws. We call them in-laws, but some people used to call them outlaws. And the reason is because this relationship is probably one of the most challenging situations. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying we have to understand that marriage is something that will test the core of our being. It will test our iman. It will test our ability to sustain ourselves in situations. It will test our ability to be fair to people. And remember, Allah Ta'ala is very fair. His name is Al-Adl. So if we stray from this path and we end up having somebody who's doing nothing to take her, not taking the sides of her wife, but to be able to sit with her and his mother and try and make peace between these two human beings, which I'm sure are Muslims as well, although I don't know for sure. But let's say they're both Muslims, then we are allowing them to oppress each other, or at least one to oppress the other. And we are actually a party to that whole thing. It's nothing but serious trouble.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
again, I would advise the sister to not be shy in consulting with a close family. If there is, again, I have to be careful with this because sometimes close family is the source of harm to the person. So don't be shy in consulting. Don't be shy in asking somebody who you can trust. It could be a good friend. It could be somebody who can become a thalith, a mediator. So don't give up on things because your husband, for example, is perhaps not aware of his responsibilities or is aware of it and is unable to fulfill them, because it does happen. Sometimes men get caught up in this and really don't know what to do. So it's not to put the blame on one party or the other, to say perhaps your husband doesn't realize how much responsibility he actually holds. Or perhaps, I don't know if she has, I'm assuming you've told him, but if insult is a part of it, often communication is broken down.
Mhm.
So communication becomes the key. How are you talking to each other? How much do you sit and hold hands together? How much are you able to say, honey, I love you, but this hurt me. Could you please try and do something about it? And talk in a manner where the person can understand that this is affecting you as a human being. I think there's a very narrow balance here. I hope I've answered the sister's question.
Yes, Jazakallah khair. So the next question is, what to do if I feel extremely drained in my marriage, even though I'm only in my early 20s and we have no children? So
Yeah.
again, like we don't know the background here. Is it
Yeah.
emotionally drained, physically drained? But
Yeah.
maybe just talking about the importance of, also self care and not.
For
So,
sure. For sure. Jazakallah khair. Once again, a big topic to be, to close in a few topics. It's when you feel emotionally, physically, intellectually, spiritually drained, please reassess your life. Please look at how you are leading your day, which means, are you nutritionally well balanced?
Mm.
Is your sleep good quality? Is the management of stress knowing some principles? Is there physical activity? Is there entertainment that's halal? Is there enough smiling, forgiving, accepting that something we will not be able to change, and that life is not some, it's not Jannah, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he said that dunya sijnul mu'min. This dunya is a prison for the mu'min. And he said also a jannatul kafir. So it's going to be troublesome, if you like, or testing, or there's going to be things that will actually make you wonder sometimes, why is this happening to me? This is going to be a feeling, because remember, our old enemy shaitan will present things that are a normal part of growing up as something challenging.
Yeah.
Because when we only focus on ourselves, and I'm not directing this at the person who's asking the question, but a lot of us, when we focus on ourselves only, will find lots of things wrong. When we find things that are wrong, we focus on them. As the famous saying goes, when you focus on something, it grows. You start feeling sorry for yourself. You put yourself in that victim mentality mode, and you look around you and you say, why is my life like this? And look at my friend's life, and look at that so and so's life. And I wish I had done that. And you start to really, as I say, adopt the whole victim mindset. And it doesn't do anything for you. As opposed to you saying, Allah wants me to do better.
Exactly.
Allah has put me in this difficulty, in this situation, only because He wants me to come and rise even higher. I have it in me. La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha. Allah Ta'ala said, never will we put you through a test that you will not be able to go through. You might feel like, no, I can't be going through this. But look, your Creator thinks you can. I'm not asking you to put up with emotional abuse, by the way. I'm not. I'm not asking you to not take care of your personal needs. I'm not. I'm not asking you to look at your lifestyle and perhaps even to your family doctor and say, I feel like this. Am I deficient of vitamin B, for example? Am I getting enough sunlight, for example? Do I have good methodologies established to have sleep hygiene? If you haven't watched our podcast on sleep hygiene, I'd highly recommend it. It had some, I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece of ideas, but it's giving you some band-aid solutions to
Mhm.
start off things.
Yeah.
So I don't want you to think that everything is wrong in your life. I'm just saying, Have some criteria according to which you can look at your life. Am I resting well? Is my eating organic, wholesome? Do I have enough ways to relax within inverted commas?
Mhm.
Do I have a set of good people that I can see my life story with, right? There are people that share powerful life lessons from me. Have I read the stories of the prophets, for example, who I realized were some of the most blessed human beings on this earth, and yet they went through test after test after test. And if somebody who didn't know any different saw them and said, wow, this guy, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't have
Yes.
food to eat for 3 months. That sounds like somebody very, very deprived.
Yeah.
And yet he is the Habib of Allah. He's the beloved of Allah. Now, how would you see it in that light if you didn't know the big picture? You would not. And you would end up feeling very upset to say, I don't have food to eat. There's nothing in my house. That guy next door is not even Muslim. He has 3 cars. He seems to have everything good happening to him, while me, Muslim, 5 times a day, Salah, I seem to be going through one thing after the other. It's just not fair. Can you see yourself doing this?
Yeah.
I know I
Yeah.
can. But there is where the big picture comes in. Do you realize you're looking at a pixel? You're looking at a very small part of his existence.
Good, Jazakallah khair. So
Jazakallah khair.
we have about 10 minutes left and 3 questions. So unfortunately, I want to get through them all, but unfortunately, we'll just have to, I apologize to the viewers. We'll just have to sort of touch upon them a little bit. So the next question, again, a lot of questions came in around this theme. So I just tried to group them together, but it was how to build love and communication between a spouse that doesn't like to or is not willing to communicate openly and acknowledge issues.
Jazakallah khair once again. We have to recognize something else that I think a lot of people, perhaps myself included, some years ago, didn't recognize. A few of us have come into marriage with baggages, as I call it. Things have not gone well. We might have seen a father that was very quiet when he was upset. We might have seen a mother that was just out of control when she was upset, or the other way around. We might have seen people humiliating each other. We might have seen people that did not respect what would be the most personal things, boundaries. We might have not seen love in marriages. The Prophet ﷺ, we were hearing this morning in a hadith, was kissing his 2 children when one Baddu, one villager came and he said, you kiss your children? I haven't miskissed one of them. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if you're not merciful, you will not be shown mercy. Meaning, you have to give this emotion to feel it. It's not something you have ingrained in you. No, you demonstrate it. You forgive people. You start to find reasons for making another person's wishes your command. What is marriage in the end? Marriage is to make somebody else's priorities your priorities. Marriage is to be able to give more than take. There is a difference between love and lust. Lust is taking, love is giving. And I think if people understand this simple principle, it's not about taking, it's about contributing. It's about being happy to give. The Prophet ﷺ, subhanAllah, if you look at his personal life, he would eat the piece of meat from exactly where Aisha had eaten. Why? Why is that necessary? He's showing the care and the love that he has for his wife. He's asking her, how do I know? He said, she asked him, how is our relationship? He said, like a knot. Wow. What a beautiful concept to describe in one word our relationship, a knot. And so she would ask him intermittently, how is the knot today? And he would say, tight as ever. Why don't we share these beautiful concepts with our wives? Why don't we smile more often? Why don't we hold hands more often? Why don't we walk on a beach? Watch the sun come up. Watch all the things that God has placed in your life to make you happy. Why are you focusing on all the things? Again, I'm not saying communication will build up at these things, but it's a start. Communication is never just talking anyway.
Exactly.
To me, communication is the way you look. That's why I often say to husbands, more so because I meet more husbands, please look happy. Please don't use all your happiness at work. Please don't arrive and you've had it, right? You've been tolerant all day. You've basically, heard one comment after the other and you've been smiling. You've been trying to please people that are totally godless and are totally fearless. They're just a bunch of rotten people. But because they're your clients, you're smiling at them. You're giving your best to them. You are not even questioning what they're saying. They should be questioned at what they're saying. And you come home and this girl has been sitting waiting for you all day. She hasn't even eaten her meal. And she has prepared fresh chapatis for you. and she's waiting for you to come home, and you can't even tell her that you've eaten already. What kind? I mean, subhanallah, it sometimes amazes me to say, how do you communicate? Communicate is by the way you behave. Communication is by the way you smile. Communication is by the way you hold her hand and thank her. Communication is by leaving a little wee note, I love you. I'm sorry I've not said it, but I love you. This is how you start to make the other person feel, because there's a thing called relation, and then there's a thing called relationship. Relation is created the day you sign on the dotted line. Relationship takes 20 years to build. We should not be shy. And if somebody feels their communication is not good, don't be join the crowd, is what I would say. That's how most people are.
Yeah.
Maybe your husband is an introvert and you are an extrovert, right? Happens. Personalities are different. Maybe we didn't do a personality test. I recommend highly these days, do a personality test. Please don't mind investing, preparing for your marriage. I believe this question could come from the fact that there was no preparation done. Although I have no way to know, I would guess 90% of the time there was no marriage preparation done. So you find people that have come from a family where the father was a non-communicator, was a quiet guy. You had to guess what was going through his heart. And you married somebody who was a sister who had 10 brothers and sisters, and there was a table full of people that were just always talking. Imagine if they two come together.
Yeah.
What kind of, it's like a tractor tire and a scooter tire that are trying to drive the same vehicle. Of course, it's going to be a problem. So I would say to the sister, please take some time and don't be shy. I think this is a classical situation where you would benefit from a therapy session.
Yeah.
You would, because you would start to have understanding. I mean, it might, of course, be the case that the brother is not even willing to go to a therapist. No problem. You don't have to go together. Often when people say, oh, my husband is not here, my wife is not here, and I usually advise them, look, you cannot fix another person. Please take this out of this equation. Stop fixing another person. Just work on yourself. Work on yourself, work on your relationship with Allah. See the whole world change around you. You might find it difficult to believe, but believe you me, this is the key to helping so many situations. I'm not saying it will fix everything in life, but I'm saying the other person will watch you. And all of us have an ability to see, you know what? This problem lies with me also. I hope, inshallah, that's helpful.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question, there was actually 3 questions with this word silent treatment in it.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask about it. So the impacts of silent treatment in the relationship and how to deal with spouse engaging in silent treatment. I personally think like prolonged silent treatment is a horrible form of emotional abuse and control. So any thoughts and any advice on silent treatment as a tactic in a marriage?
Like we were talking at the beginning, God consciousness is a big part of the way we deal with another person. Dhulm, tyranny, oppression is a form of, what can I call it? It is there's no question it's abuse.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to call it. And a person, again, with baggage that we don't always understand, we don't know what this person is coming from. This, I think, would say is a probably classical situation where somebody has seen this role model in their home. They have seen that they saw a father that was silent, who would refuse to, could be a woman also. They were silent. Silence, sadly, checks out the person's ability to guess. They can only guess for so long.
Yeah.
After that, they might become silent too. I have heard, not seen, a marriage that lasted without conversation for several years. They were talking through their children, tell her to do this or ask him to get that. And I was thinking, how would those children grow up in those 10 years or 5 years or 3 years that you weren't speaking? What are you expecting to achieve from all this?
Yeah.
I wonder if this individual who's doing this is actually working in an office or has some outside world to deal with. Because how are you going to deal with the outside world with this kind of situation? And why do we bring the worst of our personalities for the one that's closest to us, which is our wife?
Yeah.
I often find that not just strange. I find that almost like there has been no understanding of the purpose of marriage. I believe that we could all do with a little bit more understanding. We should not be shy in almost getting a marriage tune-up. A lot of people don't like the idea that if there's nothing wrong with them, why should they go to a physician? And I, having practiced as a surgeon for 35 years, I used to use the term, Brother Kashif, called selling ice to the Eskimos. What that means is giving and convincing somebody to buy something which they have plenty of already. Eskimos have a lot of ice, they live
Yeah.
in ice. So the idea here is promoting the concept, but with a smile, not insisting that we are right. Conversation. And I hope this person who's doing the silent treatment is not silent all the time.
Yeah.
So find those moments when this person is communicating and set some rules of engagement. Also, find some ways in which you can resolve matters, which means there must be something that says, peace, let's stop, enough, enough. Or, I'm sorry, I can't take this conversation anymore. Let's take a break, let's come back to it. But have some planned, as I said, planned silence is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
There is
Exactly.
nothing wrong with having some silence in your life. In fact, I would say the world has become almost too loud for some of us, right? There's noise pollution, there is what other pollution is there, there is image pollution, right? You look at your phone, you look at 10 images that you don't want to see, but you
Yeah.
see them anyway because they're part of the ad things that are going with whatever you want to see. So in some ways I can understand that's contamination in the world,
Yeah.
but to do this in a planned way as zulm against the person who's married to you, no. This is something I would say to the sister in three words. First, please get to some kind of therapy. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It could be a good friend that you can engage with. Say, my husband, I mean, again, this is where the importance of good relationships outside marriage also comes in.
Yeah.
If we've had good social support all along, if we've had people that we can consider, I can talk to this person, he's a confidant, I think that's a huge blessing of Allah, to have somebody that you can always ask. Say, I'm really stuck in this situation, could you help me? I personally find that modern world has deprived us sometimes from these most valuable relationships. That's why I believe there is a almost a mushrooming of all these therapy things, which is a good thing, but it also is a danger sign
Yeah.
to say we don't have anybody to fall back on unless we see a professionally qualified person to speak to. We can't speak to my father because he's too emotionally disturbed himself, or my mother who's had some outbursts so that I dare not speak to her.
Mhm.
This has given rise to this whole industry where people that are completely foreign, and not foreign but strange, are sometimes dealing with things. And particularly do I find this, no disrespect meant to non-Muslims, people who don't even understand the worldview that Muslims have. So they have a very different understanding of how marriages work. So for me and you, marriage leads us to Jannah. A good marriage leads us to paradise. But for a person who does not believe, for them marriage is just a business contract that if it's working well, that's fine. If it doesn't work well, then both have their own paths to follow.
Yeah.
So I would say, please, the first thing, consult. Secondly, if you have good friends, allow that good friends to intervene. And thirdly, last but not the least, yes, if you have no other option, I wouldn't leave this situation too long because it can cause serious emotional harm to you long term.
Jazakallah khair. So the last question we have here is it was so it's not related to marriage, but someone that's seeking marriage. And one thing we've talked about often is we gotta get more open to more different ways of searching for our potential spouses, online being one of them. So the questioner was just asking any tips for building trust in long distance courting scenarios, online scenario, like you're going to make that jump into marriage, but it's someone that potentially you've never been face to face with because it's all been long distance and online. So what
It,
advice can you give for people to get over their nervousness there?
Jazakallah khair. Definitely, this is one of those things in modern days that we are facing, seeing more of.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. I don't in any way doubt that this is a challenge, and it can sometimes be a serious reason for not doing this for too long. Because my concern is the emotional entanglement that occurs
Yeah.
in the process of getting to know somebody better. Because this can result in exchanging of images, for example. This can result in sometimes really exchanging of conversation that could be recorded by the other party. Unfortunately, I have seen it where people have been emotionally and physically blackmailed for what they did before they got into that relationship, if they ever got into that relationship. So imagine a number of multiple long distance courting not going well. How would that leave you at the end of the day? It would leave you extremely vulnerable to a future potential relationship not going well because you've had so many disappointments, if you like. So I would advise the person, I don't know of any good way of doing the long distance scenario. I hope it's a short term thing. What I would recommend in this case is please conclude this relationship ASAP. Don't leave this on a sort of undefinite long term scenario. Perhaps it's something you're working at. So we often mention the 200 questions, which not everybody likes, pre-marriage. I recommend that people complete those questions and just exchange them with each other with confidentiality to say this is only for that I'm interested in getting married, and
Yeah,
destroy them if the relationship doesn't go through at the
exactly.
end of it, because that will give you trust of what the other person is thinking. So if the other person doesn't want any children, it's good to know.
Yeah.
The other
Mhm.
person doesn't ever want to leave their country of origin, it's good to know. If that other person expects your husband's your husband's mother never to live with you long term, good to know. So those 200 questions, and we're very willing to share with people that like to, if they want to. They are, by the way, on FYI, Family and Youth Institute, or the website is fyi.org.
Mhm.
If you want to, anybody wants to look it up, they have these pre-marriage questions, 200 plus questions. I would say that this questionnaire, exchange those questions with each other. It'll
Yeah.
give you a lot of understanding of who the other person is. Please don't use physical images as the reason for building trust.
Yeah.
Please don't have inviting postures taken of yourself and sent to the other party. I highly discourage this, particularly for sisters, because this is room for emotional and potential other blackmail in the future. And it's not a way you build trust by sending images of yours, which that sister or is non-mahram to you. She's not somebody that is in any way related to you. There are some ahadith that say that we should not see more than the face of the sister anyway.
Mhm.
So to send images and to build trust, I'm sure that's not what you're doing, but I'm just saying, please don't do this without having a good idea of what you're planning to do. So the questions would way. Another thing would be to have your wali, your guardian, if it's a sister, speak to this individual in the long distance
Yeah.
scenario, or at least be involved in this conversation.
And I think one of the things about long distance is aiming to make it short distance as soon as possible. So if you know
MashaAllah.
that, this is something that I want to get into, then as you said, like shorten that courting scenario. I think that's something that could be its own like podcast on its own, that
Yeah.
our courting stages are so long
Yeah.
now because we think we need to know everything
Yeah.
about a person, but people change. We have so many things. So it's kind of honing in on what's really important,
Yeah.
and then making sure that that lasts for a shorter amount of time. I think that's part of
I couldn't
yeah.
agree with you more. That
Yeah.
when we have prepared our homework, we've done our homework well,
Yeah.
the actual task should not take too long.
Exactly. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. So that's all for the questions. So Sister Munta, I know we're a little bit over an hour, so I'll just pass it back to you to wrap up, inshallah.
Yes, for sure. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Rashid. Thank you
Jazakallah.
so much
Inshallah.
for today's conversation. My favorite part was the question and answer. Like just hearing your answer to these questions, I'm like, okay, this is something I can use for myself too. Especially what you said about building love and communication
Yeah.
between spouses. So Jazakallah khair for
You're
joining
welcome.
us
It's a
today.
pleasure. Always a pleasure. I would just
Yeah.
say at the end,
Yeah.
for all those who are listening, please consider this the most valuable thing that you will do in your life.
Yeah.
Building your relationship as a husband and wife should not be less than building your career. You're preparing for your career for years. Spend a little bit of time building this career also before you start.
Exactly.
Jazakallah
Okay.
khair.
All right. Jazakallah khair, everyone. Thank you so much. Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum wa
alaikum wa rahmatullah.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.